I tell parents never to give their child a smartphone, and they're nodding along. They're convinced. They see the data, and they come to me and say, okay, I get it, Dr. D'Souza. So when they're 16 and ready to drive, that's when we give them the smartphone. No, not even when they're ready to drive. Okay, well, what about when they're 18 going off to college? Then we have to give it to them because no college student has survived thus far in human history without a smartphone. No, my point is never give your child a smartphone. One in a million kid is prepared to use it without falling into addiction and distraction. Chances are your child is not that kid. I'm Dr. Johann D'Souza. Today we're going to address the two most common objections. What about driving and college? First, a clarification. When I say never give your child a smartphone, I'm not saying that no one should ever have a smartphone. I have a smartphone. I use it. I run my own business. It's very convenient for me. My point is that, except in very exceptional cases, a child is not ready to use a smartphone well. Not a 16-year-old, not an 18-year-old, probably not a 25-year-old. When they ask me, well, what is the appropriate age? Maybe 30, 35, perhaps. Just look around you and ask yourself, how many adults do you know that are not addicted to their smartphone? The adults that you and I know that receive it, that have a smartphone, got the phone in their adult lives. They were already well established. They already had many good habits, and they're still addicted. People, boomers, grandparents, these people can't get off funny cat videos and other memes that were popular 10, 15 years ago. Now think about how much harder it is to avoid that addiction when the device has entered your life during your development. At that point, the device becomes like another appendage. It becomes part of one's nature, a second nature, as Aristotle says. If you want to give your child the ability to one day use the smartphone well, you'll have to protect them from its evil influence at their most sensitive period of growth. And then, of course, foster the good habits in them so that they can ultimately use it well when their brain has finished developing, which, again, studies show between 25 and about 32, 33 is when the brain finishes developing. Last part of the brain to develop is the judgment center, the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for self-control, inhibition, forward planning, making sacrifices, moral reasoning. The teenage years are when it's not developed, and there is an abundance of dopamine receptors in the brain as compared to the more developed adult brain, making teenage years, of course, the worst time to give this highly addictive device, this dopamine powerhouse. The reason parents give their child a smartphone when they drive is primarily maternal anxiety, anxious moms. They want to track the child's location. They want to be able to check that the child is safe at all times. And this is not actually helpful for the child, either physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. Physically, because when that smartphone is in the car, that's a huge source of distraction. Think about how distracting the smartphone is for you and I if we have it on our person in the car. Do you want your child switching songs on iTunes or Spotify while they're driving? You want them checking messages while they're driving or even watching videos? All that is going to happen if that smartphone is in the car. Of course, then the objection is, but how are they going to be able to drive if they don't have GPS? Again, fake objection. We've driven for years, maybe at this point, almost centuries, without having a smartphone, without having a GPS. Now, we've become so dependent on it that our brain is molded to need it. So first I would say, hey, why not give your child the gift of a real life skill of a sense of direction, of being able to go from one place to another without looking at a GPS. I was talking to a high schooler this past week. He said he was so impressed when his friend came to pick him up from his house to the other guy's house without using GPS. Yes, that is considered a great accomplishment now these days. The guy who picked him up had lost his phone and he wasn't attached to it. He actually had gone a long period of time without his phone prior to that because his parents had taken away. So he wasn't dependent on it. He had this real life skill. So that is a real gift, being able to navigate without the GPS. And maybe step down from that, being able to navigate just with maps. You remember when Google Maps came out and that was such a big new technological innovation? I remember having a friend over and printing out the map to get to where we wanted to go. And we thought that was so high tech. That was high tech and it still is high tech. They can print out a map to get anywhere they want to go and they can study that map. And if they get lost, they can pull over and study it again. Now, if you really do want the GPS in there, fine. I mean, I use GPS too. I have a terrible sense of direction because I have been raised with these smartphones, unfortunately. But what you can do is just get a dedicated GPS. So like a Garmin will do it. You just have that. It's not a smartphone. It just stays in the car. Or if you have decided to go the route of giving your child a feature phone, see the previous video on that, then you can get one that has maps, which I think almost all of them do. So it's still not a smartphone because you don't have unlimited browser access, but you have the specific function that's helpful, which is the GPS in this case. By the way, something that I try to do to avoid being as dependent on the GPS is before driving, I take a look at the destination and the maps to get there. And I try to memorize as much as I can without looking at the phone and see how far I can get without looking at the GPS, because my goal is to remove the dependence from the GPS over time. So I hope that addresses the first objection, why they don't need a smartphone when they start driving. What about going to college? Look, if you think your child is mature enough to use a smartphone well, then they are mature enough to buy one themselves and pay for it themselves. Because the objection parents make is, well, they're adults now. They're grown up. They're leaving the house. They can get one for themselves. They have so many responsibilities now. Well, if they're so capable and responsible, why do you need to buy it and pay for it every month for them? Which is actually pretty expensive. So they can go through that process themselves if they're so mature and responsible. But reality check here. Are college students responsible? Are college students mature? Is turning 18 a guarantee of maturity? We live in a society of perpetual adolescence. I mean, most adults are just children in adult bodies. And when we're talking about someone in their 20s, or even 30s, unfortunately, we're talking about someone who's had less responsibility than a 12-year-old would have 100 years ago, really without exaggeration. What are college students famous for? They're famous for partying, using drugs and alcohol, and promiscuous lives, getting up late, blowing off classes. This is not the person who's going to be very responsible with video games and social media and unlimited access to pornography on a handheld device they carry in their pocket all the time. And they have an enhanced reach even when they're sleeping and are probably using for hours when they're in their bed. A college student is not mature enough to handle this. Yet, brain hasn't even finished developing. It may not even finish developing until they're twice the age that they are when they entered college. I got my first smartphone when I was 25. Thank God I didn't get it earlier than that. And I think I was still too young. I think I was still not ready. Maybe about 30, probably I would have been ready for it. Now I think I use it very well. I don't believe I'm addicted, but that's because I just don't use it as a smartphone. I don't carry it with me. I have very few apps. I don't have any social media. My personal belief is if you use it as a smartphone, you're going to be addicted. I'm more and more convinced that if you use a smartphone as a smartphone, it's almost impossible. It's not impossible to be addicted. If you want my practical guide for parents, the 4 critical moments that parents miss, check out the link in the description below and reach out to me if you want me to speak to your church, your school, your parent group.